welcome to another exciting edition of Baseball Now. As always, I am your host, Scotty. It's been an interesting All-Star week. We had the All-Star week come up. It was a 2-week period. We had the trade deadline coming past Monday, which had a few deadline deals come out at the last minute. We had a couple of big scores, and we're going to tell you all about it in this week's episode of Baseball Now. So let's kick off the show, as always, with the start of our weekly Rewind. Thomas, down in our Atlanta studio.
All right, thank you, Scott. Let's go ahead and take a look at that Week 16 recap. And, folks, this was a 10, 12-day period through the All-Star break. So we had some interesting scores. We had an upset or two. So let's go ahead and dive into it. Your first one, you had the Georgia Dominators, that's myself, falling to the Wildcats, Tammy, 833 to 810. This was a game that the Wildcats took a lead on, not the Wildcats, the Dominators took a lead on early throughout the week, and the Wildcats seemed to always be able to cut into that gap. And they were able to overtake the Dominators on Saturday en route to a 23-point win, which was the highest scoring affair. And so you have the Wildcats on the year. They moved to 8-7-1, and the Dominators moved down to 9-7. Let's go ahead and take a look at the top performers. For the Wildcats, you had King at 61 points, Riley at 59, and Pavetta at 52 points. For the Dominators, you had Ozuna at 62, Burleson at 61, and Snell at 55 points. So let's go ahead and move on to the next game. This was a game that was interesting throughout the whole 2-week period, and Greg was in a little bit of trouble, but he was able to overcome it and win in another close score. The Demon Duck Lindsays at 630. They moved to 11-5 on the year. And the Gatlinburg Cubs at 575. They moved down to 4-12. The top performers for the Demon Ducks, Gilbert at 72, Blanco at 57, and Lugo at 46 points. And for the Cubs, Hader at 56, Soto at 47, and Quintana at 46 points. And that was an interesting battle all week. And now we move to just a little crazy. That would be Dan at 662 points. He moves to 9-6-1 with the win over the Atlanta Express. 509 points. They move down to 9-7. And the Express is falling like a rock. Top performers for just a little crazy. Turner at 74 points, Bradley at 60-something, and Cole at 63 points. And for the Express, Valdez at 57, Judge at 47, and Finnegan at 41 points. And now we'll move on to the father-son rivalry. The Warner Robin Bombers, that's Jackson, 678. He moves to 6-10, and he's on a roll. More on that in our Who's Hot and Who's Not segment. And the Chili Dogs are, again, another feature on the Who's Hot and Who's Not segment. The Chili Dogs are 585. They moved to 7-9. For the Bombers, Rooker at 75 points, and Munigata at 67, and Servino at 54. And for the Chili Dogs, Arizona at 49, Otani at 41, and Horner at 40 points. So this was an interesting battles all week. Some teams that have made a couple of moves in the playoffs. There's some, interesting things going on. But that has been your look back at Week 16.
All right, thank you, Thomas. We're going to go back to you here in just a second with a couple of those trades that you were bringing up and that I brought up. So let's throw it back to you. What have you got cooking in the kitchen with the trades from the trade deadline?
So, over the last couple of weeks, we've been mentioning that the trade deadline was fast approaching for Monday, July 22nd at 12 p.m. And we do have some trades to talk about. Very interesting. Not a whole lot of stuff got done, but there was kind of a little frenzy at the last 5 minutes of the deadline yesterday. So let's go ahead and first get to the trade. On Friday, July 19th, late night trade went down between the Just a Little Crazy, Dan and the Georgia Dominators. Dan trades his catcher, Will Smith, and the Dominators trade first baseman / third baseman / outfielder, Spencer Steer. Interesting trade on that one. And then you have the two deadline deals that were done yesterday. You have the Wildcats, that's Tammy, trading Jose Altuve, a second baseman, to Ruben, the Atlanta Express, and Ruben trades Gleyber Torres, a second baseman, and Max Scherzer, a starting pitcher. And then the last trade to go down, you had the Gatlinburg Cubs trading Jack Flaherty, a starting pitcher, to the Georgia Dominators, that's myself, for Luis Arraez, a first baseman / second baseman, and Matt Waldron, a starting pitcher. And those were the trades that went down the last week or so. And as you know now, the next thing is all you can do is the waiver pickups, as there is no more trading at this time. It's all waiver and free agent moves now, everybody. And that is a look at your trades. Thank you, Scott. Let's go ahead and look at that Week 17. Scott, what's on the schedule for this week? You have the Georgia Dominators at 9-7, taking on the Macon Chili Dogs. That's Ken at 7-9. And this is a big game for the Dominators. They need a win after suffering that upset last week against the Wildcats. And you have the Demon Ducks. That's Greg at 11-5 versus the Wildcats, 8-7-1. That's Tammy. This will be another interesting ball game right here. The Wildcats, they need a win. They are a half a game out on the playoffs. More on that in a minute. And they also need, a win here would take the series against the Demon Ducks. They've already taken the series against the Dominators, 2-1. Just a Little Crazy, that's Dan, 9-6-1 against the Gatlinburg Cubs. That's Scotty at 4-12. Could be an interesting ball game right here. Could Dan get upsetted? That would be a big win for Scotty. And then you have the Atlanta Express at 9-7, along with the Warner Robin Bombers at 6-10. And this is an interesting game for the Bombers and the Express. You've got two teams, one going up and one going down. So could Jackson continue on that winning ways and might be able to sneak into the playoffs? Maybe. He needs a lot of help, but, stranger things have happened. And the Express, they look to be falling out of the playoffs right now. We're going to go ahead. That is your Week 17, what's going on this week. And now we're going to look at the who's hot and who's not part of the program. Right now, again, who's hot? The Warner Robin Bombers. Jackson at 6-10. He's won 4 in a row. And now you have Just a Little Crazy. That would be Dan. He's won 2 in a row. And for the who's not, you have the Atlanta Express featured once again as they were last week. They have now lost a whopping 5 in a row. And again, you have the Macon Chili Dogs. That's Ken. They have lost 3 in a row. So you've got the same two teams on the Who's Not segment. Folks, you don't want to be featured on the Who's Not 2 or 3 weeks in a row. That's never a good idea. Never a good idea. You don't want to do that. You always want to be, if you're not on the Who's Not, you just want to be left off that side of the program. Because when you're on the Who's Not segment, that's pretty bad news usually. Usually means you're free-falling. But that's the look at Week 17 this week and the Who's Hot and Who's Not segment.
All right, thank you, Thomas, for that great week look ahead of the next week. We're going to go ahead and take a look at our power rankings for the week released by the commissioner every week. Leading off in the number 1 spot for the second consecutive week is the Demon Ducks at 11-3. Followed by Dan's Just a Little Crazy at 9-6-1. Thomas has fallen down to the number 3 spot at 9-7 with a tie with the Atlanta Express at 9-7. Then you got the Wildcats coming in at 8-7-1. Remember, the Wildcats and Dan did tie earlier this year. We'll see how that plays out in the playoff picture. And then you've got the Macon Chili Dogs at 7-9. This year, first year in a long time, the Chili Dogs have dropped below 500. And the usual two teams ranking out at the bottom, the Warner Robin Bombers at 6 and 10-ish. And you've got the Gatlinburg Cubs at 4 and 12. So that's your week 17 power rankings. Now we're about to flip it back to Thomas for his playoff picture and who.
All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at the standings and the playoff preview. Right now, your number 1 seed would be the Demon Ducks. That's Greg. He is 11 and 5. And ESPN has got a 96% chance to make the playoffs. And he is 2.5 games ahead of the 5th seed. At number 2 this week, you have Just a Little Crazy. That's Dan at 9, 6, and 1. He's at ESPN's got him at 81% likely to make the playoffs. And he is a game ahead of the 5th seed. At number 3, you have the Georgia Dominators at 9 and 7. 75% likely to make the playoffs, a half a game ahead of the Wildcats at number 5. And number 4, you have the Atlanta Express. That's Ruben at 9 and 7. He is tagged at 70%, and he's also a half a game ahead. And number 5, you have the Wildcats at 8, 7, and 1. They have a 58% chance. That's Tammy. And Tammy is a half game outside of number 4. And then at number 6, you have the Macon Chili Dogs at 7 and 9. And that's Ken. And they are given a 17% chance to make the playoffs. And Ken is 2 games out. And then at number 7, you have the Warner Robin Bombers at 6 and 10. And you have at number 8, and the Bombers are 3 games out, by the way. And you have the Cubs, who are Scotty at 4 and 12. And he is about 5 games behind. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple things. 3, 4, and 5 are very interesting. You have the Dominators ahead of the Express based off of points 4. That series is tied up at 1-1. Points 4, the Dominators have more points than the Express. That's why they are number 3. And the Express, that's why they're number 4. And the Wildcats, because of that tie against Dan a few weeks ago, they are still a half game behind. But the good news for the Wildcats, they do own the tiebreaker over the Dominators. So that is crucial. They own the tiebreaker over the Dominators. They could own the tiebreaker over the Demon Ducks if they win this week. And they have an opportunity coming down the road to own the tiebreaker over the Express, which that could be crucial as well. So the Wildcats have a couple of options. The name of the game for Tammy's team is just keep winning and let the rest of the stuff take care of itself. That's pretty much the name of the game. So your playoff preview, you would have the Demon Ducks. That's Greg. He would be taking on the Atlanta Express. That's Ruben in the first round, 1 versus 4. And this would be an interesting ball game as that series is tied at 1 apiece. And very close to the first game margin was around 80 points for the Express, and the second game was around 50 for the Demon Ducks. And your 2 versus 3, you would have Dan, Just a Little Crazy, versus the 3 seed Georgia Dominators. That's myself. And this series is also tied at 1 apiece. You have Dan, who won the first game by around 30. And then the Dominators won the next game by around 60 or so. So very interesting as you look ahead to those playoff preview matchups. So it should be tight, and the Wildcats and the Chili Dogs are not done. And maybe the Bombers are not done. So still got a long way to go to determine who's going to be in this thing and who's going to win this thing, as it has been very, very, very competitive. And that is a look at your standings and the playoff preview.
Thank you for that great outlook on the who's hot, who's not in the playoff picture. That's all the time we got for today, folks. But as always, I'm your host, Scott. I hope everybody has a great week. There will be no bullpen show this week. We'll start back next week with Baseball Now on Monday and the bullpen on Thursday. And be looking forward to our college football show with me as your head host. and the NFL shows that'll be coming up on Cashin Sports, a branch of East Tennessee Media. So be sure to hit that subscribe and like button and follow us on over to YouTube at Cashin Sports and East Tennessee Media. And for your host Scott and the rest of the Cashin Sports crew up here in the East Tennessee Media Studios, have a great evening.